Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole for April 28th, 2021, 7:01 p.m. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item is a roll call.
Alan?
Allen, Aradafrada, Gerhardt, Herbst, Maldonado,
Here.
Richardson,
Here.
Strassman,
Here.
Udell,
Here.
Wheeler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, very good. Let's see, what's next? The approval of the minutes from March 24th, 2021. Do I hear a motion?
I move approval of the minutes.
Second?
Second.
And do we vote here as well?
We do vote.
All right. All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion passes. Next item, public appearances for non-agenda items. We have anybody on Zoom? None. No one on Zoom or in chambers. Item 6, agenda items. First item is respectful workplace training presentation from CIVMIC. And we have Sarah Olson and Danielle Patton. Sarah, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. I just wanted to introduce Danielle Patton. I wanted to make sure that all the members knew that we use cities and villages mutual insurance for all of our training. So they have some really great leadership program development that we can send our employees to, and they do our respectful workplace, our harassment trainings, our safety training. So I just wanted to introduce Danny and thank you for coming back again here to give the respectful workplace training. And just to give everyone a heads up that I'll be sending a link out to complete the anti-harassment training. There's like a 30-minute, basically like a training module that you watch, and then you just take a little quiz and then you're done. I think some of you already completed it, so you don't have to do it again. So we'll send that out a little bit after tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Sarah. And Danielle, welcome. I'll let you take the lead.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I've met maybe a few of you when I did this last in February, I believe. So I'm really excited to be back. It's always a pleasure. You're a really great group. I'm going to start with sharing my screen. So bear with me because I don't want to break anything. All right. So does everybody see the screen, creating a respectful workplace? You do? Okay, perfect. All right, so the premises of the topic today is anti-harassment. I have titled the training, Creating a Respectful Workplace, because I feel that everything that we cover, whether it is that you are in the trenches every day, or if you're in the municipal building, or if you're an older person, it's so important to foster and maintain a respectful workplace, one that is free of harassment and unprofessional behavior, okay? So diving right in to be respectful of everybody's time today, what we're going to cover is what is illegal harassment, three of the main areas that we think of, that when we look at, when we think of harassment. We're going to be able to identify behaviors that are unprofessional, prohibited, and illegal. We'll also take a dive into what is bullying and the difference between harassment and bullying, and then identify what would be acceptable workplace conduct. So there's a couple laws that we take a look at when we look at what overarches the anti-harassment and protections. And that would be the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, which prohibits employers, employment agencies, labor unions, and licensing agencies from discriminating against employees and job applicants. So this has a much broader umbrella in terms of we think of, it's not just for employees, it's also for the applicants. So it has protections based upon their age, arrest and or conviction record, ancestry or race, disability, honesty testing, sex, sexual orientation, and military status. One thing that I have recently encountered when we think of, just as simple as military status is I had a member who wanted to rescind an offer of employment to an applicant because of them being in the military. They felt that because they served time in the military, that they would be a wild card, they become a liability. So they wanted to rescind that offer. So that was here when we look at the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, gives that job protection to the individual so that that can't take place. And then we also jump into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the main area that you're going to see me. I'm going to keep hitting the drum and jumping in on when we think of harassment and protected classes. And this prohibits discrimination or harassment based on the following categories, such as race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. So what is the difference between bullying and harassment? So bullying and harassment, they are very closely related, but they are not the same. The difference between bullying and harassment is that bullying is used to offend or undermine someone's internal characteristics, whereas harassment usually attacks more physical traits. So some of the key differences would include like levels of physical contact, how outward or noticeable the act is, and whether the act deviates strongly from workplace activity, things like that. And we also think of it whether the act targets, protected characteristics. So here I give a side-by-side on the differences between bullying and harassment. Bullying occurs when a person commits offensive, intimidating, malicious, or insulting behavior that causes often emotional but also physical harm. Whereas harassment is illegal when the behavior is directed at a protected class, as I indicated in the previous slide. When we jump back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, we jump into race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. So how does one define harassment? So harassment is any unwelcome conduct based on one's sex or membership in another protected category. And we're going to take a deeper dive into some of what those categories look like, such as quid pro quo or hostile work environment. And then how do we know if it is harassment? So when it's harassment, it is deliberate or repeated behavior. It is unwelcome, it's not asked for, and it is definitely not returned. It is one-sided. All right. So what are the key elements or points that you think must be present for something to be considered harassment or sexual harassment? So when we think of harassment, there's the more in your face instances where when we think of like sexual harassment, an individual walks by and grabs another individual's bottom. Okay. There's also one where I've recently heard of an individual went into a break room where there was a dry erase board. They took the dry erase board and drew a picture of a nude woman with large breasts. That would be offensive and also could be a form of sexual harassment. Now there's we think of like the protected categories. Let's say I have an individual who is 65 years old. And I know this, okay? And I walk past an individual who just recently got a promotion to an IT position. And I go past and say, hey, you old fart, how did you get that position? You're 65, what could you possibly know about IT? Well, under the Title VII, age is a protected category when you're 40 or over. Seeing as this individual would have been 65 and I targeted one of their protected categories by indicating, hey, you old fart, what would you possibly know about IT? You're 65, you're so old. That could be deemed as harassment. When I think of like inappropriate or unprofessional behaviors, I oftentimes think of like directly when I think of myself, for example. I'm a tiny person, I'm 5 feet tall. And if I were in a supply closet, for example, and I'm trying to reach for a box way up high, and another colleague or my supervisor walks by and says, hey, shorty, it looks like you're struggling there. That would not be deemed as harassment. That would, however, be inappropriate or unprofessional behavior because being short is not a protected category. Neither one is appropriate for the workplace, okay? When we are working, whether we are out in the community or we are in a municipal building or a DPW, we are representatives of our organization. We are representatives of our cities and villages, and we need to act in a professional, appropriate manner, okay? So I just wanted to point out what maybe a couple of the differences would be. I do, remember dating back some of my time in HR, I would have employees that would come in and say that they're being harassed by a supervisor. And after getting to the bottom of it, we would deem that it was not truly harassment, it was inappropriate behavior. Again, putting the emphasis on that neither one should be tolerated in the workplace. Again, whether you're out in the field or you're in the building. So taking a dive into different forms of harassment. So we have hostile work environment, quid pro quo, and then harassment by agent or supervisor. So looking at a hostile work environment, consideration is given to all the circumstances that we have here on this page. We look at the frequency and severity of the conduct, whether it is threatening and or humiliating or merely offensive, and whether the harassment unreasonably interferes with the employee's work. So when this takes place, harassment must be both subjectively and objectively so severe or pervasive as to that it alters the conditions of an individual's employment and creates an abusive working environment. So some examples of a hostile work environment would be discussing sex acts or using sexually suggestive language, telling offensive jokes about protected categories of people, or making unwanted comments on physical qualities. Another one would be displaying racist or sexually inappropriate pictures, using slurs or insensitive terms, or making inappropriate gestures. So those could fall under the hostile work environment. And the next one we jump into is quid pro quo. So this for that. So a little more obvious, right? So you do something for me and I will do something for you. Or if you don't do something for me, I will do something to you. When we think of quid pro quo, this normally does involve a supervisor and an employee, or somebody who has of higher authority against somebody who would not have the same authority level. So we could oftentimes look at it as from a common council level, right? Quid pro quo, you repair this street before other districts get finished, otherwise I'll make things very hard for you at the next public works meeting. Or another one would be, you see that this project happens this summer, this specific way that I want it, regardless what anybody else has to say. Otherwise, I'll make sure I'm outside every day causing a scene at that location of the work site being done. I'm going to make things super difficult and embarrassing on the site. So this for that, you do this for me, or I'm going to do this. And the next one is harassment by agent of organization. So this too typically involves a supervisor or somebody of higher authority. And the threshold of tolerance is lower for the law. They feel as supervisors or people of higher authority, you should know better. So when these types of situations take place, the organization does take on complete responsibility. Also, when there is a case where harassment by organization takes place, these often do involve tangible employment actions. So these would be actions or that could affect a promotion or failure to promote, hiring and firing decisions, demotions, undesirable work assignments, compensation decisions, things like that. So they're tangible employment actions that take place. And the next piece we're going to look at here is the affirmative defense. So this is a component that is looked at in the investigative period. Now, I don't want to bring this point in and make it seem as though just because this takes place doesn't mean that if there is some sort of harassing behavior that it's okay. It is never okay. It's never appropriate to harass an individual or sexually harass another individual. I apologize, that was my dog, he was in here. I bring this in because this is definitely a component that is looked at. So when we look at affirmative defense, we look at is reasonable care to prevent and correct the harassment. Was it taken? Was there prompt, reasonable acts that occurred to prevent or correct whatever it was that happened. So did you report it to supervision? Did you report it to somebody higher in the organization to see that it can be stopped, or an investigation can take place and disciplinary actions can move forward? They also look at did the employee unreasonably fail to take advantage of any preventative or corrective opportunities or otherwise avoid harm themselves? So did they keep putting themselves in a situation that maybe they were in originally that had occurred, where maybe, again, there was sexual harassment or something like that. And then they kept putting themselves in that place repeatedly. So did they avoid the harm otherwise in that situation? So the next piece we're going to look at is a deeper dive in bullying. So again, as I said earlier, just to recap, this occurs when a person commits offensive, intimidating, malicious, or insulting behavior that often causes emotional but also physical harm. So here we're going to take a dive in the next 2 slides of different types of bullying. So there's physical bullying. This includes any physical contact that would hurt or injure a person, like hitting, kicking, punching, etc. This includes taking something from someone as well. Then there's verbal bullying. So this includes name calling, making offensive remarks or jokes about a person's gender, socioeconomic status, or religion. And here, as you see, I parenthesized here that this actually could fall under the arena of harassment, because now we're jumping into those protected categories. And then we also have indirect bullying and exclusion. So this includes spreading rumors or stories about someone, telling others about something that was told to you in private, and then excluding others from that group. And we have then intimidation bullying, when a bully threatens someone else and frightens that person enough to make him or her do what they want. And then the last piece of it is cyberbullying, which we're finding a lot more common now, especially in this technological world that we are currently, we're going into. And thanks to COVID, we got shoved into it at stellar paces as well. So we have sending messages, pictures, or information using electronic media, computers, and that includes your emails, your instant messages, direct messages, and then cell phones, whether that be over text message or voicemail. So if all that is privy information, in the event that there is a harassment allegation that comes in, that becomes documentation to support whatever that allegation is. So in the event that there's harassment in the workplace, we think big picture, how can we prevent this, or what should we do to prevent it further, or just stop the situation? And so I wanted to capture here the employee and then supervisor or mayor's responsibilities. So we need to inform the harasser directly that the conduct is unwelcome and it must stop. And I am completely respectful and sensitive to the fact that not everybody is comfortable doing this. Nonetheless, if you are able to inform the harasser, you should always report it then directly to supervision or somebody higher in the organization. If you're not, nonetheless, you should still be following that chain of command. If the individual is a supervisor or somebody in management, go above, go to human resources, go to city attorney, whoever it might be, but it should definitely be followed through. Action should be taken, because the action needs to stop the harassment. And then document the events of the harassment. So what happened, when it happened, time, location, if there's any supporting documentation, what is that? Are there emails, text messages, things like that? And as a supervisor and the mayor, it's important that policy is always provided to the employee, okay? They need to know what the expectation is of them. They need to understand what is the protocols in the event that harassment takes place. They need to be informed of, EEOC, ERD, how that process looks, if it goes to a state level, all of that. If they need to file a complaint, how does the complaint and procedure process work? So the policy needs to be provided to employees and explained to them from the top down, expectation, accountability, all of it. Employees should also acknowledge receipt of this policy and that they understand it, be given the opportunity and afforded the ability to ask questions and clarification. And it's always smart to review the policy periodically, every couple years, every 3 years, just a refresher, just say, hey, these are the policies that we have. Again, this is the expectation from the top down, our culture, and they can sign off on it. And then above all, setting the example for your staff is the most important piece. You're going to lead by example. You want to walk the walk and talk the talk. So when we are setting the bar for our staff, that, this is what we are committed to. We are zero tolerance when it comes to harassment and bullying. Set that bar and lead by example. The next component is regarding retaliation protections. So there is the piece for opposing discrimination, and then as well as participating in anti-discrimination proceedings. So basically any employee who files charges or participates in any way in the investigation, proceedings, or hearing, they are protected against retaliation. So on both state and federal levels, there are laws that take place that state it is illegal for an employer to retaliate against whistleblowers or other employees who report various types of illegal activity, or such as harassment in the workplace. So as I said, when we think about the whole big picture, how can we foster this culture, whether it be out of the building or if you're in municipal buildings, to have a culture, a workplace that's free of harassment. And I think it starts with civility, showing civility towards one another. And as it states here, civility is claiming and caring for one's identity, needs, and beliefs without degrading someone else's in the process. So I like numbers, I like data to support my points. And I look at here, how does incivility impact your bottom line? So when you're incivil, there's no, the civility is not there in the culture. So it affects the performance of staff. And it shows that 2/3 of people cut back on their work efforts. And I know from my time working in government, I used to work for one of the larger cities here in the state of Wisconsin for 5 years. And I often remember that we had to do a whole lot more with less at times. So it was one of those situations where we couldn't afford for the performance of our existing employees to not be there. So 2/3 of employees have indicated they've cut back on their work effort because of incivil work environments. 80% of people lose time worrying about what's happened. So they sit and they think and they dwell on the harassing behaviors, the culture that's taking place because of that accepted behavior. And then 12% of people report they actually left a job because of an uncivil incident. So if you've ever heard the term, people quit their bosses or leadership, they don't quit their jobs. Most people actually love what they do. They love coming to work. They love giving back, especially as government employees. That's one thing I remember fondly is I loved being a part of the bigger picture and being able to give back to my community. But people oftentimes quit their leadership. They quit their bosses because again, whether it's lack of morale or like I said in the previous slide, lead by example, practice what you preach, right? If you want an environment that's free of harassment, that people feel safe in, they want to be in, set the bar of what the expectation is and hold people accountable. And then 25% of people report that they are uncivil because that is the example set by their leadership. I have sat in many, many meetings in my time where I've had to ask an employee, why did we do this? Why did we think it was appropriate to take such action? And they said, well, I thought it was fine. My supervisor does it. My supervisor allows it. Why can't I? So it's very important, as I've said now, 2 or 3 times, lead by example as leaders. We are grooming our employees to eventually replace us. They're the future of our organizations. So let's not foster environments where bad behaviors are, carrying forth. So then I close this out with just the infamous questions of if you're not sure about your behavior, if you're not sure if this is harassment, or maybe, yeah, it was harassment, but I was just joking. It couldn't be that bad. I always ask individuals in my class to look at these 4 questions and think about, again, in government, we're in this massive fishbowl. We are for everybody to watch and see what's going on all the time. So what if your actions made the news? How would that affect you? Again, as a representative of your organization, how would that affect the organization? If you're an individual that just doesn't really mind or care as to what type of reflection it has on the organization, think of how it would make your family feel. If you were to make the front page of your newspaper, or again, your local news, for a harassment allegation from the workplace. Also think of, would this behavior be acceptable if this was geared towards your mom or your dad, grandparent, spouse, right? Or if the victim was your son or daughter. And let's say you don't have a son or daughter, just replace the title here on the screen with somebody that's important to you, a niece, a nephew, a cousin. Would these jokes still be funny? Would they still be appropriate if it was geared towards an individual close to you? And then I also end it with, do you feel there's equal power in participation? And I say yes. If you're not a part of the solution, you are the problem, okay? If it's your friend or a colleague that is actually the person giving the harassment and you're laughing at them or you're egging them on, it's definitely not part of the solution. You need to report things that happen. And as individuals who are, again, representatives of the community, we can't afford to be in that light, that scrutiny. We should be showing that we are professional and we are proud. We are proud to be these government servants and we are professional individuals. So that does close my anti-harassment, creating a respectful workplace. I know I had a half hour to do this last time, and I think I had the same thing this time. So I think I successfully achieved that. At this time, if anybody has any questions for me, I'm more than free to answer anything. Otherwise, I can share my email address. If you want to talk offline, I'm definitely more than willing to do that as well. Hearing silence, I take that as none. So I appreciate everybody's time and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda, excuse me, Ethics and Robert's Rules of Order. City Attorney Valerie Zisman, did I pronounce that correctly?
That's correct.
All right, she will speak to Ethics and Robert's Rules of Order. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you for having me here today. Good evening. I'm Valerie Zisman. I'm the City of Fitchburg City Attorney. It's a pleasure to meet you in person for the first time here today, and to those of you watching remotely, hello. Here I am in this room for, it seems like, the first time in quite a while. I wanted to come down and make an appearance today and introduce myself to those of you who have not met me or have not met me in person in the past, and let you know that I'm here and I'm always happy and ready and available to discuss any issues that you may have. So the purpose of today's presentation is by no means to let you know absolutely everything you'll ever need to know about any of these topics, but it is to introduce you to the idea that these issues are out there and to kind of put them on your radar. So today I'm going to talk primarily about open meetings law. I'm going to touch on conflicts as well as public records law. And before I get into those issues, I just want to mention to you that my role here at the City of Fitchburg is to provide you all with legal advice in your capacity as members of the Fitchburg Common Council. I'm not a personal attorney to any of you, so my attorney-client privilege exists with the city and with the Common Council and with the City of Fitchburg, in effect. But I am here to provide you with advice. What I do not do is any kind of enforcement of these rules. So from time to time, somebody will come to me and say, I think a rule is violated. Can you please fix it? And other than advising each and every one of you, should you want my advice, I do not do enforcement. So these types of issues, conflicts issues, open meetings law issues, and public records law issues are enforced by the district attorney and the attorney general. They're not enforced by the city attorney. So I just want to make sure that you all understand that. When you come to me with the questions, I will either tell you the answer or tell you I will look into it and then call you back and find out the answer and get back to you. What I won't do is, turn around and say, you've been naughty, and then proceed to punish you in some way. So please, anytime you have a question, please feel free to pick up the phone and call, or if you prefer, you can send me an email and set up a time to talk. So I do want to make sure you all feel like you can do that and reach out to me. So the first thing I'd like to touch on today is open meetings law. And probably most of you are aware of the open meetings law. And what it basically stands for is that government meetings are supposed to be open, they're supposed to be properly noticed, and they're supposed to be accessible to the public. So what that basically means is that anytime you all want to meet and discuss city business, it needs to be at a proper meeting of the Common Council, and that means that that meeting needs to be noticed. The City Clerk's Department puts together a notice for every meeting that the city has, and at that notice, there's a number of items that are listed on the agenda. This is important because if there are at any point any issues that you feel important to discuss at a meeting, those issues need to be discussed not only at the proper meeting, but those issues need to be on the agenda. Should you want to discuss something that is not currently on the agenda, what I would suggest you do is reach out to either the mayor, who with the assistance of the city administrator puts together the agenda, or any two alders can ask the clerk to put something on the agenda as well. And the deadline for doing that is Thursday at noon, the week preceding the meeting.
Actually, Valerie, isn't that Wednesday for council members, Thursday for staff?
If your materials are in form that is ready to be published, I think it's Thursday at noon, but if there's any kind of work that needs to be done, and I may be mistaken on that, I'll let the mayor clarify that. But at any rate, I'll let the city administrator and the mayor let you know what those deadlines are. But the bottom line is it needs to be on the agenda before the item can be properly discussed. The other way that something that might not be on the agenda will come up at times is that somebody from the community can come in to any meeting and want to discuss something that is not on the agenda. And that is perfectly okay. We want to encourage our citizens to be able to come in and speak to you and address any need that they have, and certainly it may be a need that's not on the agenda. You may not be even aware that there's an issue in the city. It is absolutely okay to listen to those citizens speak about their issue. If there's some discussion that council members want to have amongst each other, or any action that you want to take to address that issue, that needs to be properly noticed. So make sure that it gets on the agenda. Talk to the mayor and the city administrator, and they'll let you know whether it's Thursday or Wednesday. Whatever the deadline is, get it on the agenda before you speak about it. Because the problem is that even if you discuss a matter at a proper meeting that is accessible, if it is not noticed ahead of time, the community doesn't know that an item is going to be discussed. And so they miss out on the opportunity to participate. So that's the intention of that requirement. One of the things I want you to be aware of is this idea of a quorum. And you've probably heard that term before. And what a quorum basically means is that it's a number of you that is sufficient to determine the government body's course of action. A lot of times, that is basically just a simple majority. But there are situations where you may have a smaller number of members who can create what is known as a negative quorum. In other words, you can block a course of action. So for instance, in a budget amendment, if you need a 2/3 vote of the council, you would need 6 yes votes. However, what that means is that just 3 of you could potentially block an item, and that determines the government's body course of action. So in that instance, only 3 members could constitute a quorum. There are other situations as well that might arise where quorum might be less than half of you. So if you have any questions about discussing items that you wish to place on the agenda, or you want to sponsor and you're not sure how many people you can get involved, by all means pick up the phone and chat with me. I'll be happy to help you work through it. The other thing I want you to be aware of is this idea of a walking quorum. So as opposed to getting all together in a room to discuss city business, sometimes what happens is that people might, in the old days it used to be they would pick up the telephone and they would talk to each other, right? And they would say, oh, Alder 1 talked to Alder 2 about an issue, and then Alder 2 called Alder number 3, and then Alder number 3 said, let me get 4 and 5 on the phone, and we'll, to have a brief chat about it and sort it all out. And all of this takes place outside of a proper meeting. So that could create a problem. But another way that we see these kinds of issues pop up more recently is in conversations that take place either via text message or email. And the idea there is, if you're sending a letter from one person to another, generally speaking, letters, at least the traditional letters that used to be sent by mail, were far enough removed in time that they weren't really considered like a meeting in terms of like a face-to-face or a back-and-forth discussion, right? But when you talk about text messaging or emails, it is so quick and so it can be so back and forth that it can really start looking a lot like a discussion. So if one alder emails the entire council about an issue that pertains to city business, whether it's on the agenda or not, but it could be on the agenda, and then the council members proceed to have a discussion about it via email, and then at some point down the road there's a vote on that matter, that can really create a big problem for the city because somebody could come back and say, hey, that discussion really constituted a meeting of sorts. And so, the Attorney General has opined that potentially anyway, there's the potential to create this kind of a walking quorum using email. And I think the same can be said about text messages as well. So my advice to you in that regard would be, just be very careful when you want to reach out to the entire council and do not reply all. So if you have one alder who reaches out to the entire council, resist the urge to reply all. Or if you're like me on occasion, be especially careful to, especially if you're doing it on your phone, to make sure you're replying as opposed to replying to all. That same advice goes if you receive communication from the city administrator or from me or from another staff who might reach out to the mayor and council. We frequently do that to facilitate communication and keep all of you aware of what might be coming up. Just be mindful of the fact that if that header there, council and mayor, or mayor and council, is on there, that if you reply to that, all of you are going to receive that communication. Now, not everything is disallowed in terms of talking to each other, right? So there are a few things you could certainly discuss, and you could reply all or discuss, in person or by telephone. For example, if you want to talk about logistics of scheduling a meeting, there would be absolutely no harm in you all talking to each other about when you might be able to meet. Let's say you want to have a special meeting. If the city administrator wrote to all of you and said, we really need to have the special meeting, could you please, reply with your availability, and you replied all in terms of when you'd be available to meet, that would not be a concern because you're not talking about anything of substance as far as any action you might take. You're just talking about what might be available for scheduling, and that's fine. Likewise, you're allowed to have social lives. You're allowed to have personal relationships with each other. You can have barbecues, especially now that the pandemic seems to be at least moving in the right direction, and it seems like socializing outside is apparently considered much more safe, especially for those of us who are vaccinated. You don't have to stay away from each other. If you see each other at a bar, you don't have to turn in the other direction and run, okay? Especially if there are 3 or 4 of you. You can even go out for a drink after a meeting. Just be mindful of what you talk about. It's not how many of you are, right? It's how many of you there are and what you're discussing, right? So it's the subject matter. So if you want to get together at a barbecue or at a retirement party for city staff or any other function you want, you can absolutely do that. Just talk about whatever you want to talk about other than City of Fitchburg business, right? Kids, sports, hobbies, weather, whatever it is you want to talk about, just not city business. Does all of that make sense? So at this point, I guess I'd be happy to stop and see if there's any questions with regarding to the topic of open meetings.
I have, I have one question. Does that apply to committees as well?
That does absolutely apply to committees
Okay.
as well. Any governmental body,
Very good.
yes.
Any other questions? Mayor Richardson?
I'd say not only text messages, emails, Facebook Messenger, there's a number of other ways that you can communicate with people. All of those count.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, no other questions. Go ahead.
I'll just briefly touch on conflicts. If you think you might have a conflict of interest, there's some information in the packet that I've put together. I know there's a lot there, so I don't expect you all to become experts on this. The big thing that I think you really want to make sure that you know is that if you have a conflict of interest, and that's usually where you're in some sort of special position where making a decision would have some personal or financial gain for you in voting, just come talk to me. I'll be happy to talk you through it. We can work through it and determine whether there's a conflict. And if there's a conflict, you can recuse yourself. And what recusing yourself means is that you excuse yourself not only from vote, but also from any discussion on the item. It doesn't mean you can't participate in that whole meeting. It's just on that particular agenda item that you could recuse yourself. And that's something I'm absolutely happy to talk through with you.
Valerie, just a quick question for you. So if you are going to recuse yourself, probably the best practice would be, before we even start discussion, say, I'm recusing myself, maybe even sit back for your microphone, you're not participating in discussion, anything like that. Would that be accurate?
That's absolutely right. You don't want to participate in the discussion or in the action because you don't want to, use your position to sway other council members. Not only do you not want to vote on an item that would create some potential for personal or financial gain for you, but you don't want to sway other members or make it look like you're swaying other members, right? A lot of times when we talk about conflicts, there's conflicts in fact, and also the perception of conflict. So I would strongly encourage you to just stay away from that item. Don't talk about it. Don't discuss it with other council members, and just don't discuss it and don't vote on it. That's correct. So the other item that I wanted to mention to you is the public records law, and it's sort of the companion piece to the open meetings, right? So transparent and open government means that members of our community can ask for access to our meetings, and it also means that they can request access to any public government records. Now, of course, there's a number of exceptions and exemptions, and there's a balancing test that the custodian of records has to go through before records are released, so I don't mean to make it sound like any record that's ever created is subject to public records, but most are. And there's a presumption, much like there's a presumption for a meeting to be open to the public, and the exception to that would be specifically enumerated closed session exemptions. Likewise, in the public records law, the presumption is that these records are available to the public. And again, the interest here is transparency of government and making it open to the people over whom you govern. And so the big takeaway for you, I think, today is to remember that, number one, you're custodians of your own records because you're elected officials. And so that puts a lot of potentially pressure and burden on you in terms of the kind of records you create. The good news is that we have an IT department and a city clerk who, as much as I'm sure she would love to not have to do it, it is part of her job to go through open records requests and working with me and working with our IT department to identify responsive records, to go through the exemptions and exceptions, to redact when appropriate, and to turn those records over on your behalf, provided that those records, and at this point we're talking about email documents, are on city accounts. If you use personal email address, it doesn't make it any less of a record if you're talking about city business. It doesn't matter if you use your personal email at Yahoo or at Google, at Gmail, or text messages on your personal phone. If the substance, it's the substance of those communications that makes it a government record. And so if you use those forms to communicate about city business, you will be responsible for producing those yourself. So if you don't think you'll have that email address, 5, 6, 7 years from now, if you don't think you'll have that phone anymore, or even that phone plan, if you just don't want to have to wade through email after email trying to identify responsive records, then I think you will see the following. Use your city email for all city business that you conduct to the extent that you can. Again, I'm not here to enforce this rule. I'm not going to come after you and say, hey, you used your personal email or you're texting about city business and you shouldn't do that. You're custodians of your own records. It's your decision what you want to do. But I do see a lot of times that this can create problems for alders and for really likewise for staff potentially if they were to use their personal email address. I think we have a policy that requires staff to conduct city business on city email addresses, and likewise, we strongly encourage you to do the same for those reasons. And I think I already touched on this, but the same goes for text messages. If you're sending a text that says, "Are you there?" or "Can you pick up the phone?" or "Can you call me?" These are really pretty what we call transient records, and they're really not real records. There's no actual substance there, right? Can you pick up the phone and call me? But any kind of substantive message that you might send to one another or to staff would be subject to an open records request, and you would have to produce that. So again, I just strongly encourage you to use your city email address. It is there, it is free, it has lots of space, and it is very, well, I shouldn't say very easy, but it is manageable for city staff to search and produce records upon a request, and that you don't really have to do very much. And that will save you a lot of time and a lot of headaches. Lastly, I want to mention that I've included some materials on Robert's Rules of Order in your packet. I do want to point out that the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, of which we are a member, does put on wonderful trainings for new local government officials. And so if you're interested in attending that, do speak with, I think, at least for now, Mike Z, and he can help put you in touch with that. I believe it's called Local Government 101. It's a great training, and I believe this year they're offering it both in a webinar form, and I think they're also planning on doing some in-person trainings, I think in like September. But if you don't want to wait until September, do the webinar. I think there's one coming up like next week or within the next few weeks. So I would strongly encourage you to take that. So with that, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so I'm happy to answer more questions today. Or as I've mentioned, anytime you really have a question, please feel free to reach out to me. It is my job to help you navigate this process. That's what I'm here for.
Very good. Do we have any further questions? Mayor Richardson.
Hi, sorry. I think Tracy was going to reach out to the new alders for the training for the league offers. It's a really valuable training. I know some people took it last year. I think they found it really useful as well. I took it a few years ago. So I think Tracy was going to reach out to you. If she hasn't yet, she'd be a good person to reach out to as well.
Very good. Any additional questions? Anybody on Zoom? Mike? Mike Z?
Yeah, just a protocol question, Valerie. As far as alders contacting you directly, are they still supposed to go through the city administrator? I know we had a process or a procedure before that they were supposed to go through the city administrator just as far as managing efficiency and kind of the organization here?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're talking about working on a policy or you want an ordinance change or you want to undertake some project, with me, likewise with any other department head, you need to work through the city administrator. If you have a legal question, however, like a conflicts question or an open records question, or I just don't know about this, I'm planning to attend this event and I think other alders will be there, what should I do? Certainly, I think you could at that point then reach out to me directly. That's not a problem.
Okay, very good. If there's no other questions, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Have a good evening. The next item on our agenda for this evening is item 6C, agenda item process and timing requirements. Mayor Richardson and Michael Zimmerman are going to speak to this item.
You want to go first or you want me to go first?
You can kick it off and then I can add in.
Perfect. All right. I think, just kind of also adding some other stuff from tonight, we want to make sure that we continue to treat each other with respect, that we're respecting other people's opinions. We might not agree, but it is important that, just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean that they're a terrible person or anything like that. So let's make sure to do that this year. Maintain professionalism. I do hear from residents, from staff, from other council members, if you don't act professionally, do other things. So people are watching, and it ultimately ends up hurting you more than anything else. And I'd hate to have you kind of get a bad relationship or have a bad impression with other people. So just a reminder, as always, to do that. And, as we talk about agenda items, processing, all that type of stuff, ultimately, I'm here to help you out and get those things done. Even if I don't necessarily like the idea you might have, I'll still help you and try and walk you through who to contact, possible pitfalls, anything like that. Ultimately, I'm here to help you, and that, as well as the city administrators, as well, Mike and Misty for now, and Chad eventually. But ultimately, there's going to be things that you might not think of that we can walk you through, and you're going to be more successful. I mean, I've seen this multiple times where someone just kind of does something and sends it in, and they don't get the outcome they want, so especially in the time they want, and it would have been fixed or avoided if they had just worked with staff at least beforehand. So don't hesitate to do that. And then just kind of one last thing, going back to the other workplace training, I did talk with Sarah Olson a little bit, and this fall she's got another big recruitment she has to do for a police chief now, but this fall we do want to work on a code of conduct for the elected officials, and Eau Claire has one that we're going to kind of use to base that off of. So look for that this fall, but I think it's something that would be helpful and useful as well. In terms of otherwise process and timing, Mike, do you want to kind of get into it a little bit more? I know Valerie had said Thursday, but ultimately I think in our ordinances it does say that council members are supposed to have something in at noon on Wednesday.
We actually have two different deadlines there. So for any two council members may agree to have an item placed on the common council agenda, and the agenda must be received in the clerk's office with all background materials no later than 24 hours prior to the distribution deadline, as long as it's all submitted and in the proper format for it. So that would be Thursday noon, because the distribution deadline is Friday noon there. But then it goes on to say items not in format ready for immediate distribution must be submitted to the clerk's office at least 48 hours prior to the distribution deadline. So I think that's the one that you're referring to, because a lot of times things come into the clerk's department at Thursday noon, and they're not complete or they're not in the format that needs to be required, and then it creates kind of a last-minute crunch time for our city clerk to get things in the proper format and ready to be placed on the agenda, because the distribution time is noon on Friday to push it out to the public and on the website and everything there.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, if you're doing it on your own, then it's really that Wednesday at noon, because something's probably going to be wrong, frankly. And that's where if you're working with staff and they're helping you and they actually can do most of the work for you, then, they're getting that in for you and they're doing that Thursday at noon. And that's another reason why it's so important to work with staff, because they're ultimately here to help you as well, and they'll help walk you through those things. And that's why, they'll have it all done for you by Thursday. If you're doing it on your own and you don't want their help, that's a choice. You can do that, but that's why it's a little bit earlier then.
And the clerk's department prepares the agenda materials, and we submitted everything to them, even as department heads, by noon on Thursday in the proper format, so it's ready to go. And then what happens is it gets into our on-base queue, and the agenda items are out there, and the city administrator reviews and signs off on those, and then the city attorney also reviews those, and then the mayor also looks at the draft agenda before it's finally sent out then on Friday at that distribution point at noon.
Gabriella, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious, I was wondering if, Mike, if you might be able to send out an email to the council, just clarifying those deadlines so that there's something that's, that we can look back on.
Sure, yeah, I'll send it. I'm reading right from the ordinance here, so I'll copy and paste that section for you. Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions on that that's for the council agenda there, okay. Then just a few other notes. The standing committee agendas are usually for finance, public safety, and human services and personnel, usually are developed by the appropriate staff people, and sometimes are reviewed by the chairperson or in consultation with the chairperson on that one. And then for the board, committee, and commission agendas, for all other boards, committees, and commissions, they're usually developed by staff and usually, again, in consultation or reviewed by the chairperson as well. And hopefully you all had this handy-dandy City of Fitchburg member handbook for commissions and committees and the council. City Clerk Tracy indicated that she had shared this with everybody, and this is really a good resource in here with everything from just general information on appointments and quorums, some of the things that Valerie covered, the responsibility and role of officers and members, ethics and standards, and And then there's a good handy-dandy kind of motion for Robert's Rules of Order in this document too. So hopefully you received this. If you haven't, let me know. Tracy had emailed out to me and I can forward it out to everybody so you got that. But it's got some really good information on protocols. And I think Gabriella has a question, Randy.
Yes, Gabriella.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, if you could send that out as well.
Okay.
Just in the PDF version, that would be great to just have that, that I can search through my email and find it if I need to reference it.
No, I've got it. I'll send it right out to you guys so everybody's got a copy of
You'll
it.
send it to everyone?
Yes.
Very good.
I think one other thing I thought of too, when we're talking about agenda items, is that when we're voting on things in council, most things are a majority of members present. So when we're voting on stuff, that's generally the case. If it's a tie vote, then I would vote to break that tie. But there are some exceptions. One is financial budget amendment type things, and that's 2/3 majority, which would be 6 out of 8 people would have to vote for it to pass. So those are kind of the budget things. And then there's a couple other random things. I believe minor amendments to the comprehensive plan is 5 alders. It doesn't matter how many people are here, 5 alders have to vote for it to pass, if I remember right. There might be 1 or 2 other random things I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but majority is for most, but we will run into a few things where it's 2/3 or some kind of a random thing as well. So just something to think about too, is, you know, I want it to be a surprise when that comes up, and you think you might know what people are voting just based on what people are talking about, and you think you got your 5 votes, and oops, you needed 6. Sorry.
Couple of other things I would just mention is that Fact TV, again, will be distributing a video of the various department overviews or presentations on what we all do individually as departments. So once you have a chance to watch that and review, definitely, reach out to department heads if you want to learn more. I know Scott is eager to take people on a parks tour. I know the police do the ride along. There's lots of opportunities to learn more about the individual departments and all the things that we do across city departments. Fact TV loves to interview people, and everything. So definitely reach out and take advantage of that opportunity from city staff folks there. The other thing, wearing my economic development hat here, you probably will receive, and as we start to emerge from the COVID pandemic here, hopefully we get back to ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings and those kind of events. And as Valerie pointed out, we would encourage you to attend those. People love to see the elected officials. And again, as long as we're not talking about city business, everybody is eligible and able to attend those. We don't have to worry about quorums as long as we're not talking about city topics and businesses at those kind of events. But it really sends a positive message to our businesses and our organizations and just to different functions in the community to see the elected officials out there. We really hear a lot of positive compliments, both Joyce and I do, when there's a good representation of our elected officials at those events. So we would appreciate that just from our department. And then lastly, I would just, from an efficiency, and I'm the gray-haired guy here and probably the long-in-the-tooth guy that's been here 25 years. So just from a organizational efficiency and effectiveness standpoint, I just would really encourage you. I'm only in the acting role here along with Misty at this point in time, but the city administrator really is your day-to-day kind of contact, and he's our day-to-day manager too as department heads. So in order to run a really efficient and effective organization, it's important that the city administrator, that you're in regular communication with that person, and that they're aware of any requests or projects that you would like to have city staff work on, that you really go through the city administrator for that. Because through the years, I've seen examples where the person in that position maybe isn't aware of something, and it's really hard to kind of manage the resources and the effectiveness of the organization when they're not necessarily aware of some things that might be going on or that staff have been directed. And it really puts staff in a difficult position when you're contacted by an elected official and your kind of day-to-day supervisor maybe isn't aware of some of the activities that you've been requested to work on. So as a courtesy, I think if you could just really follow and kind of respect that protocol, I think that really allows us to operate the most efficient and effective as the city of Fitchburg as an organization. Hope I'm not speaking out of turn there, but that's just kind of best practices.
Yeah, I think just, Mike mentioned speaking out or reaching out to staff if you have any questions or want to learn more about certain departments. Certainly, if you're on any new committees, reach out to the staff liaison in your committees and just ask them questions, learn as much as you can. All our committees, all our areas of the city, all those services we provide, there's definitely people passionate about them out there. People love the library, people love the senior center. In the spring, there's always seems to be about a month where the grass is growing a foot every other day, and we can't keep up with the mowing, and so you might hear some complaints about that because people love using the parks and walking around in the parks. And so, everything that we do, there's someone who's passionate about it for sure. And all the committees we have are there for a reason and provide vital services for our residents.
Gabriella, you had a question. Go ahead.
This is slightly ancillary, but I'm just curious if we provide any training to the committee chairs. I've encountered a few times over the last year where the committee chair didn't seem to have, as much knowledge about Robert's Rules of Order as really was necessary for the conversation. People didn't know how to direct, how to create an amendment, how to deal with kind of a variety of things. I can go into detail if there's any interest in that, but I was just wondering what type of training we provide to the committee chairs, both about like official Robert's Rules of Order, but then also maybe sort of our internal policies, like how we do 3-minute public comments and how to manage things like that. I'm curious if you can give some insight. I don't know who best to answer that is, if it's Aaron or if it's Mike.
Yeah, we don't, but I agree that would be useful. I may be talking with Valerie to figure out the best way of providing that information because I know that I've seen that as a challenge for people in the past as well. I agree that would be useful. Maybe we can work with Fact TV to do a training or something like that, possibly, that we can share. And it can be for everyone. Ultimately, all people on committees probably need some education on, I want to make a motion or I want to make an amendment or, do I vote on this or not? Or when can I ask questions? So I think that there's probably some basic information about that we could put together to help not only the chairs, because I think that's a big piece, and I think there's probably some help sheets somewhere. I think the league actually might even have some when you go through the new training. And but also I think just beyond that, just some resources for people on committees in general, I think would be helpful. I see Scott writing a note, so hopefully that means that he's going to talk to Jeremy.
Mike.
And Gabrielle, I was just going to say that's a really good suggestion there. I know when I was co-chair of the Allied Revitalization Task Force in the city of Madison, they sent, we had training opportunities to go through as a chair of a committee in Madison for exactly those kind of protocols and processes and procedures. And I know that was very helpful, for me, because I had never been a kind of a chair of a public committee like that. I know we've got this handbook, which has some basics here, but I think having some further training and maybe even a video like that or resources through the league would be really, really helpful for community chairs.
Gabrielle, you have another question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Also, I don't know if it's common practice to send that PDF of that document out to all new committee members, but I do think that would be useful. I mean, obviously, I don't have any experience. Maybe that's already done, but if it isn't already done, I think it'd be nice for all committee members, maybe even just once a year, to get a copy of that so that they know it's something there for them to reference.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, I guess we will move on to announcements. The next committee of the whole meeting will be May 26, 2021. With that, is there a motion for adjournment?
So move.
Second. The committee of the whole is adjourned at...
Got to take a vote.
Pat, take a vote. Once I forgot that again. All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The adjournment passes.